What if I told you that one of the most extraordinary stories of survival, migration, and identity isn't just found in ancient scrolls or stone tablets, but written inside the human body? That story belongs to the Jewish people, and their DNA carries a history that spans thousands of years, countless empires, and unimaginable upheavals. For centuries, Jewish history was preserved in memory, text, and tradition. But in the last few decades, science has added a new layer, the ability to peer into the genome and see how biology mirrors history. And the results? They're as fascinating as they are surprising. A people scattered, yet connected. Few groups in human history embody the idea of diaspora like the Jewish people. From the Babylonian exile to the Roman destruction of Jerusalem, from medieval Spain to Eastern Europe, Jewish communities have been uprooted, scattered, and reshaped time and again. But here's the remarkable thing. Despite centuries of dispersal, their DNA tells us that Jewish populations around the world are still deeply connected. Genetic studies reveal that Jews from far-apart regions, Ashkenazi Jews of Europe, Sephardic Jews of Spain and North Africa, and Mizrahi Jews of the Middle East, share a common ancestry. At the core of their genetic story is a Levantine origin, tying them back to the ancient land of Israel. Even after thousands of years, that genetic thread remains intact. One of the most famous discoveries in Jewish genetics is the so-called Cohen modal haplotype. For centuries, Jewish tradition held that men from the priestly line of Kohanim descended directly from Aaron, the brother of Moses. That sounded like a religious claim, one you couldn't exactly verify through archaeology, but then came genetics. Studies of Y-chromosomes among self-identified Kohanim revealed a striking similarity, suggesting a common ancestor roughly 3,000 years ago. In other words, the priestly tradition isn't just symbolic, it's written in the DNA of living men today. It's a rare case where faith, history, and science intersect in almost poetic harmony. Ashkenazi Jews, whose communities flourished in Central and Eastern Europe, present one of the most unusual genetic stories of all. Research shows that today's millions of Ashkenazi Jews descend from a surprisingly small number of ancestors, perhaps as few as a few hundred families who lived around 800 to 1,000 years ago. This is what scientists call a founder effect. Because of this bottleneck, Ashkenazi Jews carry a higher prevalence of certain genetic conditions such as Tay-Sachs disease. But the same history of genetic isolation also preserved a distinct identity, a people who carried both medieval European and ancient Middle Eastern ancestry, locked together across centuries. It's a reminder of how resilience sometimes comes with hidden costs. While Ashkenazi Jews shaped the story of Europe, Sephardic Jews thrived across Spain, Portugal, and later North Africa, while Mizrahi Jews remained rooted in the Middle East. Their DNA reveals something extraordinary. Centuries of exchange, trade, and even forced conversion left genetic traces of interaction with surrounding populations. In Sephardic Jews, for instance, you see elements of Iberian ancestry. In Mizrahi Jews, influences from Persian, Babylonian, and even Arabian neighbors emerge. Yet in every case, the genetic signal points back to that same Levantine origin. No matter how far they traveled, the story always circles home. But the Jewish story isn't confined to Europe or the Middle East. Take the Beta Israel community of Ethiopia, long isolated and often viewed with skepticism by outsiders about whether they were truly Jewish. Genetic studies have confirmed both a deep connection to ancient Jewish populations and significant admixture with local Ethiopian groups. Or consider the Bene Israel of India, a community with oral traditions claiming Jewish descent. Their genetics confirm Middle Eastern roots, mixed over time with Indian ancestry, forming a distinct but authentic branch of Jewish heritage. These stories remind us that identity is never a simple binary. It's a fusion of memory, migration, and adaptation. Let's step back and imagine the map. From Jerusalem, Jews spread across the Roman Empire. To Babylon, they carried traditions that flourished for centuries. Into Spain, they wove themselves into Islamic and Christian cultures before expulsion. Into Eastern Europe, they built communities that endured pogroms and prejudice. Across the world today, their DNA connects Tel Aviv, New York, London, and Buenos Aires. Every migration, every exile, every return leaves a genetic footprint. And yet, the core identity remains surprisingly consistent. One of the most fascinating revelations is how much Jewish DNA overlaps with non-Jewish populations in the Middle East. For example, geneticists have found that Jewish populations are often closer genetically to Palestinians, Druze, and Lebanese than they are to their European or North African host communities. This highlights a truth that politics often obscures. Borders and conflicts are temporary. Genetics reveals a shared origin that predates nations, religions, and empires. So why does all this matter? Because Jewish DNA is more than a story of the past. It's a living case study in how culture, migration, and resilience interact with biology. It teaches us three powerful lessons. Identity is both enduring and adaptable. Jews preserved a genetic core across millennia, yet also absorbed influences from every land they touched. Science and tradition can align. From the Kohanim line to diaspora histories, DNA often confirms what oral memory preserved. We are more connected than we think. The Jewish story is a mirror for all humanity, scattered, mixed, yet linked by invisible threads that tie us back to shared origins. Today, genetic research is being used not only to explore history, but also to improve health. Jewish populations, because of their unique founder effects, are often at the forefront of genetic disease research, leading to breakthroughs that benefit everyone. At the same time, these discoveries raise ethical questions. How should we use DNA to define identity? Can science ever capture the fullness of what it means to belong to a people? These are questions that extend far beyond Jewish communities. They touch on what it means to be human in an age when our very essence can be read like code. And as technology races forward, from genetic testing to gene editing, we are challenged to balance knowledge with wisdom, progress with compassion. The choices we make will shape not only medicine and ancestry, but also how future generations understand identity, memory, and the meaning of being part of something larger than ourselves. The story of Jewish DNA is not just about genes, it's about survival through exile, unity despite distance, and identity carried across millennia. It reminds us that no matter how scattered we are, history finds ways to stitch us together, and that sometimes the most profound truths about who we are can be found not in monuments or manuscripts, but in the cells of our very bodies. Because inside each strand of DNA is not just biology, but memory, resilience, and the unbroken story of humanity itself. And perhaps that's the greatest lesson. DNA doesn't just tell us where we come from, it shows us how much we can endure. Empires have risen and fallen, borders have shifted, languages have changed, yet the genetic thread of a people has remained unbroken. It is a quiet witness, carrying within it the songs of ancestors, the pain of displacement, and the hope of return. So when we look at Jewish DNA, or any ancestral DNA, we are not only studying science, we are reading a living archive, a record written in flesh and blood that continues to speak, even when voices are silenced. It tells us that identity can be carried across oceans, across centuries, across unimaginable trials, and still remain intact. And in that truth lies a reminder for all of us, that our roots are never lost, only waiting to be rediscovered. That within us lives not just who we are, but who we have always been.